Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kevin Bohan, and this evening I want to talk to you about marriage. Now, I'd like to touch on a few different topics. We're going to talk about types of marriages, marital rights, marriages across cultures, and plural marriages. We're going to go ahead and start off with types of marriages. Now, according to the Royal Anthropological Institute, marriage is a union between a man and a woman such that the children born to that woman are recognized as legitimate offspring of both parents. That is not a universally accepted definition of the word marriage. Now, there's many cultures that recognize polygamy and also groups of brothers that may marry one woman, known as fraternal polyandry. Now, there's a few different types of marriage that I want to discuss. There's common law marriage. A common law marriage is where two people are living together and they may not be recognized in the jurisdiction in which they live to be able to be legally married by a court or by the state in which they live. This could happen in a place where same-sex marriage is not allowed. So maybe a man and a man or a woman and a woman enter into a common law marriage where they're not legally bound, but they are, for certain things such as tax purposes, able to file as married or to file jointly. There's also civil marriage. Now, civil marriage is that legal marriage that I was talking to you about. That's where the state is able to marry you and give you a certificate saying that the state of Alaska, say, recognizes your marriage as legally bound. Now, there's also religious ceremonies. These are not necessarily bound by the state in which they are performed. In most cases, you have to also get a civil marriage certificate as well. It's also known as holy matrimony. So this is usually done by a priest or a pastor in order to bring two people together, perhaps a rabbi if you're a Jewish. And it's more of a ceremony just to bring the families together and enjoy this joining of two young people into holy matrimony or marriage. Now, there's also something that is done in the Sudan, where if a man is not able to have any sons, he's actually allowed to offer up one of his daughters as a man in a legal marriage. Now, obviously, she would be married to another woman. There would be a man and a woman, socially speaking. So the daughter of the man would be considered the man in the relationship, both in the marriage certificate and also by society. Now, once married, the woman of the relationship would be allowed to bear a child by another man as long as that man had been okayed by the man of the household, which is also the daughter of the first gentleman. Now, that child will carry the name of the grandfather on the father's side. So that is a wonderful way, if you were not able to have a son, in order to keep your family name or your dynasty going on for generations to come. Now, there's exami, which is a custom of finding one's spouse from outside your local population. Now, this is done in order to prevent things such as incest or inbreeding, where you would be marrying your cousin or your brother or somebody who is closely related to you, which can cause problems as far as developmental problems in young people. Now, incest is one of the things that can come from reproducing within a localized group, and that is incest is sexual contact with a relative. Now, different cultures define incest differently. It might be only first blood sisters and brothers, but there's also cases like your stepbrother or a sibling who is now divorced, or a half-brother or sister. I know that there are certain states in the United States that allow you to marry your first cousin. So as far as that state is concerned, that marriage is legal and binding because that is not considered incest in that culture. Now, in the 1st to 3rd century in Roman Egypt, there was one small town where 37% of marriages were sibling marriages. However, it was acceptable in those times, so it was not considered incest. So you can see where cultural and societal definitions of what incest is can affect marriages. Now, there's also endogamy, which is the practice of marrying within one's social or culture group. Now, I will use the example of the United States. That would be, say, a mother and father who are a Hasidic Jew would want their son to marry a Jewish girl. Now that's, marrying within your social group. Also, it can happen where, there are certain cultures where it is frowned upon to marry a different race. Say a young man is not allowed to marry a woman of a different racial background. And so that is just the practice of marrying within one's own culture or social group or social status per se. More often than not, I would say that in the United States it's more of a religious criteria as far as what the type of woman or man that you should or should not marry. Now, I'd like to talk about marital rights next. Now, this is a very short section. There's just 6 things that the anthropologist Edmund Leach declared in 1955. He said that marriage may or may not accomplish 6 things. It will establish the legal father of a woman's children and the legal mother of the man's children. It will give either or both spouses a monopoly in the sexuality of the other. Give either or both spouses a monopoly on the labor of others. It will give either or both spouses rights over each other's property. So that's to say that my wife and I are equal partners in this home, in our vehicles. They are our assets, not just mine and not just hers. It can establish a joint fund of property, a partnership for the benefit of the children. That's the same kind of thing, if you may get an inheritance if one of your parents dies. That's from your mother and your father deciding to bring together in order to provide for their children after they were gone. Also, it may establish a significant relationship of affinity between the spouses and their relatives. Now that one I find to be quite interesting because, like in my case, there is not an affinity between my wife and my sister. So I'll appreciate his usage of the word may or may not, because I believe in every case is different, every marriage is different. And in the United States or in our culture, our marriages are more individual. My wife and myself decided to become married. My mom and her mom did not get together and place us into a contract with each other. It was our decision. Now I'd like to talk about marriages across cultures. Now, in industrial cultures, marriage is a relationship between 2 people, as I just said. So the choices are made by those 2 people and those 2 people alone. In a lot of non-industrial cultures, marriage is more of a union between groups of people. So the families of the bride and the groom actually decide who and where you will get married. Now, there's a couple of things that come with marriages, such as the ones in non-industrial cultures. There's a bride wealth. Now, a bride wealth is a gift given by the husband and his kin to the woman and her kin. It's kind of an insurance against divorce. The higher the bride wealth, the lower the chance of divorce is. Now, there's also a stipulation that if the woman dies at a young age, that the man may marry one of her sisters, or if not possible, then another woman from her group of people. Now, there's also that's called sororate, when a man can remarry one of his dead wife's sister or another girl from her group. There's also levirate, which is when a man dies, a woman may or may not marry one of his brothers or another man from his group or family. Now, according to Ernestine Friedel, in rural Greece has a kind of dowry where the mother's wealth is transferred into a sort of a trust fund for her daughter during her marriage. I think that that's an interesting way to look at it. So the money is kind of set aside and can be taken later on in life. Now, really quick, there's 2 types of plural marriages. There's polygamy, and that's when a man has more than one wife. In many cases, a wife may request a second wife to help with chores and household duties, and this is accepted in many cultures. Also, there's polyandry. This takes place mostly in South Asia, and this is when a group of brothers may take one wife in order to be able to pool their resources to have a better life for their family and their children to come. I'd like to thank you for your time and interest in the topic of marriage, and